Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. We're just going to allow everyone just a few minutes to get logged on and to get comfortable. Yeah, so it's just 7 o'clock now, but let's give people a minute or two to arrive. This is that really awkward time where we probably need to have some waiting music or something.
Music, yes, that's his name. Yeah. Mel will sing for you. She's got a lovely voice.
Wow. I really don't think, I think we'd lose everyone if that happened. I really do. We do want an audience this evening.
There's a way to thin out the numbers, isn't
yeah.
Oh no, that's and we had a speaker, I think it was our November or December speaker last year, who said that what they did during this time where everyone's just logging on was to ask people to put in the chat their favourite biscuit.
That is a great icebreaker.
So if anyone feels like they want to let us know what their favourite biscuit is, then of course please go ahead.
I feel like this. I'm really bad, and this is where you can tell a bit of neurodivergence is there. I feel that favorite conversations always stress me out, and I end up thinking like, well, it's but favorite in what context? There's like you've got like an evening biscuit, a Christmas biscuit. Do you know what I mean?
You're just a critical thinker, Mel.
Is that what
That's
it is?
what that is. That's what that is. Because you're in edgy mode, overthinking everything. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's really when we think about favourites. My youngest is the same. He'll be like, but I've got a favourite for this time and a favourite then. My favourite, I would say bourbon. But that's just me on today. Yeah.
Old school.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to decide now. Do you know the Fox Viennese efforts? Do you know them?
Oh, that's a bit fancy. Okay, right. We're going there.
A rare treat, but when you do treat yourself to one, you're like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff.
We've got somebody in the chat. Somebody in the chat said their favourite biscuit is a Kit Kat, which I think is quite fancy.
Well, now that opens up a discussion about whether a Kit Kat is a biscuit.
This is where I'm already on that discussion in my mind.
And now I'm like, is a Jaffa cake a biscuit? Like, where are we drawing our lines? It's got cake in the name, so I feel like no.
It's clearly a biscuit, though. It's biscuit shaped. But would you dunk it? I think that's what classifies something as a biscuit, is whether it can be dunked in something, and therefore a Kit Kat is a biscuit.
But then you know my dirty secret, Mel. You know that I don't drink hot drinks, so I can't really weigh in on the would you dunk it conversation because you're not going to dunk it in squash. That's really unpleasant.
You need to speak to my 8-year-old because he would beg to disagree there.
Well, for anyone who is just arriving and has no idea why we're talking about biscuits, all will become clear if you go and have a look at the recording later on. But let's get started. So welcome everyone to our March Centre for Autism Wellbeing Hub webinar, and we are delighted to welcome Mel Green and Claire Malcolm this evening, who are going to be talking about Black mothers advocating for their autistic children. Before I hand over to Mel and Claire, I just want to do a little introduction. If this is the first time you've attended any of our webinars, I just want to tell you a bit about what we do and give you a bit more information. So the Wellbeing Hub, there's 4 of us in the hub. So there's me, there's my colleague Fiona Knott, who's our clinical director. She's just waving now on the screen. We're also joined by our colleague Dr. Emma Harris, who isn't with us this evening, but she's one of our clinical psychologists. And we are supported by our administrator, Charlie Murphy. And the aim of the Wellbeing Hub is to build an inclusive community of autistic people and their allies to work together to build creative and meaningful solutions to support autistic children and young people to flourish and thrive. And that underpins all of the things that we do at the Wellbeing Hub. If you want to know more about what we do and the events and the activities that we're running, then please do sign up to our newsletter. You can do that by emailing autism@reading.ac.uk. You can also visit our website. We have a YouTube channel where, if we have permission from our speakers, we publish the recordings of our previous talks, and we have a whole range of talks from a range of speakers on there at the moment. And also we are funded entirely, well, almost entirely through donations. So If you like what we do and you want to see us do more of it, then there's also a link here to make a donation. I'm going to put in the chat or in the Q&A in a moment all of these links, so don't feel that you have to write them down, because I'll put them in the screen for you. Just a quick talk about our next Wellbeing Hub webinar. So we don't have one in April because of the Easter break, but our May talk is going to take place on the 22nd of May, same time, 7 to 8:30 p.m. via Teams. And we have a range of speakers. We've got Georgia, Mache, Alexis, and Vanessa, who are going to be talking about their latest book, so Improving Mental Health Therapies for Autistic Children and Young People. If you have an idea for a future talk, or you would like to recommend a speaker that we approach to deliver a talk for us, then we have a Padlet for that. And again, I'm going to put a link in the Q&A for you to have a link to that as well, if you want to fill that in. The May talk, by the way, is going to be, the link to book onto that is going to be in our March newsletter, which goes out next week. So if you're not already subscribed to the newsletter and you'd like to be, then do email autism@reading.ac.uk, because that means you will get a copy of the newsletter next week. Okay, but tonight we have got Mel Green and Claire Malcolm joining us. Mel is a former primary school teacher and is now a lecturer in education studies and a doctoral researcher at the Open University. Her work explores identity, educational inequity, and anti-racist practices. Dr. Claire Malcolm is a lecturer in politics and international relations at the Open University, and she specialises in equity, diversity and inclusion. Her work includes research for UN Women and the Welsh Assembly Government. Mel and Claire provide training in the implementation of anti-racist practice in higher education and have co-authored the Frontiers in Sociology article, Degrees of Change, the Promise of Anti-Racist Assessment. Both Claire and Mel are mothers to autistic children, which means that they have a personal and professional interest in special educational needs and neurodiversity. Their forthcoming book, Mothering at the Margins, Black Mothers Raising Autistic Children, is set for publication soon. And I've also got links to the Frontiers in Sociology article and the forthcoming book, which again, I'm just about to put into the Q&A as soon as I hand over to Mel and Claire, which I will do now. So thank you so much both. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And yeah, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having us, is the first thing to say. This is really exciting for us. And we're just really grateful to have this opportunity to join in with your work at the Hub and what important work that is. So you set us up beautifully there, Jo, by saying that this presentation is on Mothering at the Margins. It's based on our book of the same name, which focuses on the experiences of Black mothers advocating for their autistic children in the UK. And if we're going to move to the next one, and we'll introduce ourselves individually, because we have noticed a tendency for people to get us back to front. So we just want to make sure from the beginning that we get that correct. I am Claire. This slide is our positionality and our lexicon, which is to say who we are and why we use some of the language that we do over the course of this presentation. As Jo has said, we are both, before we are anything else, we are both incredibly proud mothers to our two beautiful children, to each, that is. We don't have children together, although what incredible children they would be, frankly. So I am a mother to a daughter and a son. My daughter is 13 and my son is 3. So I'd like to tell people that I'm currently dealing with raising a teenager and a 3-nager at the same time, which is no mean feat. My daughter was diagnosed with autism when she was 3 years old. She has what we characterize in the book as high support needs, although we explain at length in the book that we know that kind of gradation is quite crude. My son, who is now at the age my daughter was when she was diagnosed, is unlikely to receive a diagnosis because his presentation, he has what we have characterized as low support needs. Throughout our presentation, you'll hear us use the word autistic. We'll describe our children as being autistic as opposed to having autism. We respect the fact that that there are people who prefer one turn of phrase over the other. Again, we go to quite a lot of effort in the book to explain why we feel that the nature of our children's presentation is such that it's more accurate to describe them as being autistic, because although we don't think they're defined by their disability, their experience of moving through the world very much is, for good or for ill. So there is quite a lengthy discussion around why we think that's a more accurate description. You're also going to hear us use the word burden all throughout the presentation, which is a loaded term. And when we get to that point, we'll explain why it's not our children that we're describing in those terms. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a heads up about the lexicon that we're going to be using, the language of the presentation. And here is Mel.
Hello. I've been looking at this and not really listening to your words because I have recognised that I've put my children's ages in wrong, which I think is a really poor way to start. My eldest child is 8 years old and my youngest child is 5 years old. So I'm clearly back in my mothering, not wishing for them to grow up. So I'm Mel Green. This blathering person in front of you is Mel Green, and I'm the mother to 2 boys. My eldest son is the one who can be diagnosed as autistic and has that sort of definition as part of his identity. And we describe our son as having high support needs. And for him, that means that he is non-speaking, has sensory needs that need to be met, and often has issues around danger, in that he doesn't recognize it. So we have lots of climbing in places that we shouldn't, and so we really support him through that sensory diet of lots of access to climbing that is okay, risky play that is okay, and lots of other sensory needs being met throughout the day at home. Whereas my youngest he doesn't have an autism diagnosis, but has similar sensory issues, but also has low support needs. He's very, very verbal, very, very able, and is doing very well at school. And both of those different presentations provide different challenges when it comes to autism diagnosis. So I'm going to move on to the next slide to talk about where myself and Claire met. Claire and I met at the Open University, which is where we both work. As it's an online space, a sort of distant space, we've worked in the same institution for many a year before we even knew the other one existed. But we took part in an initiative called 100 Black Women Professors Now, which is an initiative that's to try and support Black female academics into senior positions. That's a whole different conversation about the lack of Black female academics in senior positions, but it is related to racial differences, which is what we're really interested in. Now, this terrible picture that you have, this out of focus picture, is a picture of our children together. I'm going to read you a story that explains this picture, but also let you know that we've purposely chosen a picture which is really difficult to see the faces of our children. So the story that goes along with this picture is on the 21st of November, during Claire's annual Christmas family trip to London, our families met. I felt giddy waiting, standing by my front door, looking out for their car. Once we had greeted each other like old friends reunited after years apart, our 2 autistic children, Sam and May, that's not their real names, that's for the purpose of the book, took each other out into the garden and played on swings next to each other, giving each other eye contact and smiles, while their little brothers gleefully tore open their early Christmas presents. The highlight of the evening had to be watching our children on the video monitor in my son's room snuggle up to each other on his bed like they had known each other from birth rather than for a couple of hours. They didn't know that their mothers were sitting close to each other on the sofa downstairs, sobbing as they watched. Not only are Claire and I kindred spirits, but so are our babies, and it is them who have inspired us to translate this personal and professional partnership into a book which can offer support for women whose circumstances reflect our own. And so that's taken from our book, which is about our research study, but is also about our story of being Black mothers of autistic children. Now, you'll also see our WhatsApp messages, which is how our relationship originally developed. Now, these voice notes became more than just voice notes quite early on. We were very much sharing our lived experiences of bringing up our children, the problems we were facing. Claire was facing problems with social care services. I was facing problems with accessing education that I thought my son needed. So there are our voice notes were very long and very frequent, and that's how our relationship mainly developed. It was our voice notes that then led in us into thinking about this research together and how that could be part of our research. Now, here is a bit more about our children, and I know, Claire, you're going to start.
Yeah, it's really important because we're going to be having some quite difficult conversations and quite harrowing exchanges about some of the challenges that are involved in the mother work of being the Black mother of an autistic child. We really want you to know something about our kids and how incredible they are, how wonderful they are, and how much we adore them. That's probably the most important part of this presentation is our babies. So these are also snippets from the book. We could not possibly hope to do justice to our wonderful kids in such a short amount of time, but this is a little snapshot of how great they are. So this is my girl. She is brave and adventurous. And as much as I treat the word resilient with great suspicion, because as we explore throughout the book, it's so commonly weaponized against Black women, she deserves endless credit for how hard she works to navigate the challenges that her autism presents for her, and for how unapologetically authentic she is in all aspects of her life. I adore her creativity, her enthusiasm, and her energy, boundless as it may be, and I treasure the time we spend together baking cupcakes, snuggling up in an all but empty cinema, watching special screenings of films we've already seen 100 times. There may be some people in the room who know exactly which films they are. Monsters Inc., anyone? Spinning around on fairground rides, which she embraces with glorious sensory abandon, but that make me feel like I'm going to lose my lunch. And reading, well, reciting, because May isn't yet able to read, many of the books I first shared with her when she was still in utero. So the too long don't read version of that is that she's my best friend in the world and I adore her. Her and her brother, of course.
So this is my son. I'm really struggling, actually. I'll be really honest with not saying my child's name, which is really tough. It's really tough. I love the way he sees the world, or rather the way I perceive him seeing the world. When we play music he enjoys, the way his eyes dart and dance across the room makes me feel like as if he can see the music itself. It's a beautiful, vivid visual experience that only he has access to. When he spins on our kitchen rug, one of his favourite forms of stimming, so much so that we've got him a spinning chair, at a speed that would leave me, or anyone else for that matter, dizzy and nauseous. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just scrolled away there. I'm captivated by the precision of his movement, how his eyes track a fixed point even as his body embodies wild, joyous abandon. I can't describe what it is to witness a boy in complete control of his body with a perfect balance of freedom and control. And there is the joy on his face as he swings in the garden so high that he nearly peers over the rooftop, with his grin broadening as the wind whips across his face. My son is literally indescribable at the joy that he feels on a swing, and it's beautiful to watch. I can't imagine what it feels like to him, but I really hope that comes across what his sensory needs are and how they need to be met as part of his regulation. Okay, so presenting about SEND children, those of you who are here probably know a lot about children with special educational needs and disabilities, which is what SEND stands for in England. And you should also be aware of the mainstream media presentation of parents of children who have special educational needs and disabilities. It's mostly quite negative, especially recently. And these are some examples of stories that have been in mainstream media in the past 5 years. You would have seen the SEND explosion in school, where the number of pupils who have got EHCP, so education and healthcare plans, has doubled. We've got the amount of children who are identified as needing support, not being offered that support, or taking years or longer to access that support. We've also got parents who are having to oppose things like school hour reductions, or their children being erased from school photos. And a lot of this has been used to create what we've been calling an anti-parent narrative. So these are things like perceptions that parents are trying to access a golden ticket, which is what a Yorkshire MP described this as, described an EHCP as. This idea that in order to get, I don't know what they think that we are getting with our golden tickets, but more money, more less effort in life, I guess, through these golden tickets, that the perception of parents is that we're pursuing this in nefarious means, and not for our children. And then that has an impact on the types of policy and practice that we have, because, as I mentioned, this was a Yorkshire MP that I don't think coined the phrase golden ticket, but at least used it within a recorded political meeting. So this idea that parents are kind of gaming the system enables the train of thought that government, that councils need to reduce the amount of children who are recognised as having additional needs. And so that then further leads to this misrepresentation of motives and dismissal of concerns that results in an extenuated diagnosis process, where there's got to be lots and lots and lots of evidence over a long time period in order to get a diagnosis, which means that we've got a lot of children who are sitting within this pathway, as I think a lot of councils call it, not receiving any extra support. That's also leading to this lack of understanding when it comes to the nature and the impact of autism, leading to a skepticism when it comes to diagnosis. But this is creating a sort of double-edged sword about where people are aware of autism and people have an understanding of autism, but it can now lead to a watered down version of autism being presented, where if you just do X, then they can access learning, rather than full understanding of accommodations needed and support required. And then finally, this assumption about parenting deficits that are created through this extenuated process creates a butting of heads between teams that are supposed to be working together in the interest of children. That is our aim. Our parents are looking to support their own children and advocate for their own children. And these teams, such as SEND teams in councils, are supposed to be supporting children within education. And rather than working together, they're butting heads instead. So all of this means that SEND parents are fighting longer, harder, and more vociferously than ever to secure the educational support that their children, autistic children, needs. And I say, why is it even more of an issue for Black mothers? And I'm talking about the layer that is added to this experience by being a Black female. So when we're thinking of this layer, I want us to think about intersectionality. And we haven't got the space or the time to be going into a real sort of theoretical discussion about intersectionality, but it's the idea of having these multiple layers of oppression and discrimination. So we can accept the idea that women are often discriminated against and experience inequalities when it comes to society, and we call that misogyny. And if we can think about the Black people and the experiences that they have of discrimination and oppression, we call that racism. And when we think about discrimination against those with disabilities, we call that ableism. And what we're stating here in our write up of our experiences and the experiences of the Black mothers that we spoke to is that being a Black woman has its other layer of misogyny and racism, interconnected, interrelated, that we call misogynoir. And as a Black SEND parent, that anti-parent narrative and stereotyping is linked, can be linked to racist tropes that exist about Black women. So intersectionality in this case is related to these different layers that are all complexly, simultaneously taking place as part of being a Black mother of an autistic child.
Okay, I'm going to flesh that out a little bit by talking about some of the stereotypes and tropes associated with Black motherhood. What I would often do in having this conversation is sort of invite people to look at the image and tell me what they think they're looking at. But in the interest of time, because we really want to get on to sharing some of the findings where some of the incredible stories that our research participants have shared with us, and also because I'm nervous about making the Q&A work, I'll be honest, I'm just going to tell you what these things are rather than have you guess. So the first image of Serena Williams is unfortunately not me showing you an image of an incredibly accomplished athlete. This is me showing you an image that portrays the stereotype, the trope of the angry Black woman. Okay. Both Mel and I, in our experiences of advocating for our children, have been accused of being angry and being aggressive when all we're really trying to do is make ourselves understood and stand up for our children. The bar for being considered angry is set in a very, very different place for Black women than it is for white women, generally speaking. And this immediately takes away. Oh, what have we lost there? That immediately takes away one of the tools you'd otherwise have in your arsenal when trying to advocate for your child. If you are on tenterhooks the entire time trying not to be perceived as the angry Black woman, and you feel like you constantly need to placate people and you're not allowed to express any frustration or any disappointment, then it's, it can be very, very difficult to put your point across without being dismissed. Okay. The other image, the next image, is the image of the stereotype of the Black woman who has multiple different children by multiple different fathers. She's irresponsible. She sees her kids as a paycheck. She's not raising them properly. So it's an image of parental deficit. And therefore, if you see misbehavior in Black children, then that misbehavior is a consequence of a parental deficit. Dad's not there. Mum's not good at what she does. Okay, so that's another cliche, another stereotype that informs deficit-based assumptions about Black motherhood and Black mothers. The next image is the image that we have variously termed the community mother or the othered mother. We're going to, on this occasion, we're talking about the community mother. So a community mother is someone who feels that she has, and doesn't just feel, actually, it's not a perception, it's a reality, someone who has what feels like a maternal responsibility, but beyond the people the children that she's raising. So it's that sense that you're responsible for the other women in your community who are being mistreated. It's that sense that you're responsible for the care needs of other people in your family and beyond. That sense that you are having to make yourself available above and beyond your physical and emotional capacity to meet other people's needs, often to the direct detriment of your own. And then the final image is the strong Black woman. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on, that doesn't seem particularly offensive as an idea. Surely that's a compliment to be told that you're strong. But the trouble with the strong Black woman narrative is that it underpins this idea of resilience. Okay, so we're so strong, we're so tough, we can take on anything. That means that we don't need help. Okay, and it forces us to internalize the pressures that we're dealing with and cope with them alone, because of the perception that whatever you put on our shoulders, we'll find a way to get through it, not just for ourselves, but for everybody else as well. And there are limits to how much strength a person can demonstrate. Resilience is something that we see weaponized against Black women all the time as a way of kind of silencing us, that we're not allowed to speak out. We're not invited to speak out when we are not coping, because the expectation is that we're somehow naturally able to do so. So all these stereotypes inform deficit-based assumptions concerning Black mothers, feeding into the belief that Black mothers do not want, need, or deserve support for their autistic children. Just really briefly, and we're not going to linger on this at all, you've seen one quite famous example of the vilification of Black motherhood. So if you're curious, this is just a little snapshot of the fact that we've got two people in comparable positions here. You might recognize them. One of them eating avocados to try and combat morning sickness, the other weaponizing avocados as murderous implements for her nefarious intentions, according to the Daily Mail. We have one person who holds a bump and cradles it tenderly, and we have another one who is engaged in a new age bonding technique of some sort, which is a gossamer thread away from calling her a witch doctor just because she's holding onto her baby belly. So you can see, and then one who went for a nanny with 20 years experience, well done her, and the other one who set out to break royal tradition by getting some random in to look after her kid. So this is an extreme example of what we're talking about in some respects, because these are people that you know, these are people in the public eye, so it feels extreme, but actually it's an indication of what we're talking about, that the bar is set higher. The standards that we are held to as Black women are higher than the standards that white women are held to under the same circumstances. So what does this mean for our kids? Okay, this is the question. If there are assumptions being made about Black women and Black motherhood, and those women are raising autistic children, how do those assumptions then feed into the way our children are being perceived and our children are being treated? What is happening, and this came out of our research very, very clearly, is that the needs and behaviours associated with autism are often being overlooked, misunderstood, or even punished by educators when racialised tropes and stereotypes come into play. So in essence, when people, and it's not just educators actually, it's professionals across the board, when people look at our children, they are not first and foremost seeing children who are autistic, they are seeing Black children, and they're making a series of assumptions based on those racialized tropes. So they're seeing dysregulation, they're witnessing dysregulation, but they are perceiving it as aggression. They're witnessing inattention, they're perceiving it as laziness. They're witnessing social communication challenges, they're perceiving it as rudeness. They're witnessing academic struggles, they're perceiving it as a lack of support at home or a lack of interest on the part of parents, Black mothers who are not supporting their children through their academic journeys. They are seeing innocence, but the lens that they're looking through is a lens of adultification, so that our kids don't get to be kids, that there are assumptions attached to their behaviours that would not be attached to their white peers. And these racist misconceptions increase the risk of exclusion for Black autistic children. The statistics bear this out in incredibly depressing fashion, which in turn then exacerbates the risk of the school to prison pipeline. This is having real lived consequences for the children in our community.
Great, thanks, Claire. So, as I mentioned, we had these conversations via voice notes. So what you're seeing is what we were saying to each other via voice notes. They don't see my child, they see this. They don't see me, they see this. So we wanted to really think about whether these were just common experiences for us, which we knew probably was not the case, or whether they are common experiences for Black mothers in the UK raising autistic children. So these are our research questions, and that was the first one that came into our minds, was what are the common experiences between us? We then started to drill down and think about how we perceive the services that we are advocating for our children within. So are we seeing all of them as negative? Are we seeing some of it as negative, some of it as positive? How do we go through those processes? How do we navigate those systems in order to gain access to those services for our children? We also started to think about whether it was just us that were thinking that the role of being a woman, the role of being a Black woman, actually has any effect on these experiences, or whether it was actually a common experience amongst other Black women. And finally, we didn't want to just do research. We didn't want to just say, okay, well, we found that these experiences are common and these are what these experiences are. We really wanted to leave with recommendations for these services in their work with Black mothers. We want to actually make changes, transformative changes amongst those services, within those services. We will actually bring some of those up at the end of this presentation. So where did we start? As I mentioned, those voice notes were the start. And luckily for us, there is an existing research method that for qualitative researchers like ourselves, we found ourselves being drawn to. Some call this collaborative autoethnography, some call it collective autoethnography, for the sake of the fact that we view ourselves as Black feminists. We are calling it collective autoethnography, in that we've brought together our stories. We thought about our experiences and we valued those experiences. So those experiences are presented as vignettes throughout the book, and they're kind of interweaved with the experiences of our participants. So how do we get our participants? We had a survey that we launched in January 2024, where we got 30 respondents, and 26 of those turned out to be viable participants. And even though we launched this survey across the UK, our only respondents were from England and Wales, which is actually where I'm from England and Claire's from Wales. So we thought that was quite kismet, I think. So we gained some experiences that way. And within that survey, there was an option for the participants to self-select and be recruited for online interviews. So we had 9 mothers who did that, and then 3 practitioners from varying initiatives, charities, and community initiatives identified themselves as being interested in supporting us with the kind of best practice online interviews, so giving us advice on best practice. And the 9 participants who were self-selected for the online interviews then also self-selected for focus groups. So we had 6 of those participants and we split them into 2 focus groups, which were all conducted online.
Okay, and this is what we found when we spoke to all those incredible women. We identified what we have termed the triad of oppression. So going back to what Mel was saying earlier on about those layers, about the intersection, about the way that being a woman, being Black, and having that proximity to disability puts you in a very particular subsection of society. What we found is that that subsection to which we belong is subject to what we term the triad of oppression, subject to the impact of racism, misogyny, and ableism, and that when you bring together the effect of all 3 of those forms of oppression, what it gives rise to is the multiplicity of burdens. And I said earlier on that the use of the word burden is potentially quite contentious. You know, it implies that being a mother to our children is burdensome. That's not what we're saying. Our children, as you probably noticed from the beginning of the presentation, are everything to us. We don't consider our kids to be the burden. We use the word burden in the same way that it's used in Marxist discourse, okay, which is to describe essentially something that we are being subjected to by societal influences, okay, something that is making our life more difficult than it needs to be because of structural inequality. So we draw that partly from Marxist influences and predominantly actually from Black feminist thought, okay, this idea that we are being burdened by the failure of the organizations and the professionals who are supposed to be helping us. We are being burdened by the way in which we are being perceived and pigeonholed and discriminated against, okay, and that we defined those burdens as taking multiple forms: physical, psychological, cultural, practical, and temporal, and that when you bring all of those things together into a situation where you cannot then seek any support from outside agencies, where there is not culturally competent intervention available to back you up and help you navigate those burdens, what results is what we have termed the privatization of trauma, which is carrying all that around with you, okay, with no one to turn to and with no mechanisms in place to provide meaningful support. We've broken those burdens down further to explain what we mean by each of them. So the physical burden, we borrowed in some part from Geronimus here, who's used the term weathering, and to describe the way in which carrying that trauma around with you marks your body, okay, has an effect on your well-being, your physical well-being, and your emotional well-being, which we'll come on to next. But actually is affecting you are carrying it in your immune system. It's having an effect on your very being, okay? And also the vicarious physical burden of knowing that your children are being subjected to risk and harm that you are then feeling via their experiences. So we have a few quotes, Mel, from our participants that speak to the experience of the physical burden of weathering. Okay. I've got 2 health conditions that feature chronic fatigue. Black women's physical pain is ignored to our significant detriment, to the point of harm and death. You're just supposed to carry it. You're just supposed to deal with it. No one gives a shit about your pain. Apologies for the profanity, but we wanted to be authentic in quoting these. Another participant shared with us, everybody knows what their limits are and their capacity. And I would say, actually, I far exceeded my capacity. It really did put me in a very dark space, genuinely, like I was losing sleep for a while. I couldn't eat. It really, really affected me. It's really having an impact on my physical well-being. I have high blood pressure. And I do think that this just ongoing fight is extremely strenuous and stressful on both the mind and the body. It's taken its toll on my mental health and on my physical health, hair falling out or feeling weak or tired or all those things. It really used to physically take its toll on me because, you're breaking down. I'm so tired. Obviously, anyone else in this sort of typical situation, if they weren't sleeping for years, you'd be like, oh no, this is really not good for you. But you have no choice. You just have to crack on. So this is that sense in which our mothers, the mothers who shared their stories with us, were telling us that they were physically carrying the effects of being without meaningful support, of being in a position where their needs were not being met, where they were meeting other people's needs at the direct expense of their own, and where they felt they had nowhere to turn. This has a physical impact on the women in the study.
Thanks, Claire. And so nicely moving on from that, well, not nicely, but relatedly, the psychological burden, the stresses of advocating for our autistic children as Black women. Looking at all these, yes, it's in nice rainbow colours, but looking at all these effects, all of these stresses on the psychological beings of these Black women, the racial discrimination that a lot of the women mentioned. I think about when Claire and I first started voice noting, we both shared a lot of similarities, but one of the things that we're both married to white men, and we both mentioned that we have sent our white husbands off to speak to professionals, teachers, with scripts, basically things that we've written down for them to say, but we think would be perceived better because they're not a Black woman. And that's come from experience rather than just our imaginings. A lot of the women that we spoke to mentioned having things like anxiety, depression. So there speaks to the psychological impact. All of the women we spoke to talk about parental blame, being blamed for their children's diagnosis through a deficit parenting or just seeing things that weren't there. Delays in receiving diagnosis or even getting to the point where they could be diagnosed or their children could be diagnosed, and the impact of diagnosis. I write in the book that I experienced the diagnosis, the experience of having my son diagnosed as a relief, because I had not been believed for such a long time. But I know other parents, it is a feeling of, okay, but what now? What am I left with? Where do I go? What support? And that speaks to the lack of support that a lot of the mothers mentioned, the lack of self-care. We know as mothers, just in general, that is something that's not sort of forthcoming for most mothers, but mothers who aren't getting any sleep are literally not able to care for themselves. It feels a bit of an extended burden. And then finally, managing children's self-harm and suicidal ideation was mentioned by mothers that we spoke to. So, in the words of our research participants, it can be terribly isolating and lonely in the journey of advocacy. Because there was such a lack of involvement from professionals in the beginning, and because everything was brushed off, I genuinely believe that it was my fault and it was something that I had done. And honestly, for the first 7 years of his life, I tortured myself thinking it was me, and that affected my mental health massively, massively. And I genuinely believe that he would be better off with another mother in somebody else's care, and I wasn't enough. When you've had that sort of mindset for such a long time, it's very hard to break that. I don't know where to begin. Honestly, I don't. It's traumatic. I'm still affected by it to this day. So much gaslighting, downplaying, deception, and ignorance, and I'm tired of it. I literally threw myself on the ground and bawled like a baby because that's how much I was holding in. I feel like it was my inadequacies, why my child was clearly suffering, and I was ridden with guilt because I felt like no matter how hard I'm trying, it just wasn't enough. There was so much self-blame and I absorbed it. Now, this was something, a burden that really took a while to sort of be able to define, which is, we really struggled with this word cultural, because I think a lot of there's a lot of deferred sort of semiotics and meaning when it comes to culture. So we're talking about these different sort of atmospheres in two respects, these different environments of systemic racism and neglect from the services that these Black mothers try to access. But there's also something about raising culturally conscious children who aren't aware of the effects they have on people. I think about my son, who is a very loving child, which I was told that he wasn't ever going to be able to be, actually, before he was diagnosed as autistic. I was told he wasn't going to show love. But there's something in raising children to be aware of his love and him showing it to random people that we see in the supermarkets. And it's nice now because he's a cute 8-year-old, but as he grows older, I worry about that perception of that society has of Black children. So those are the three kind of environments that we're talking about when we're talking about the cultural burden. So in the words of our research participants, it's really, really challenging, especially when you know you're trying to advocate for the best for your child, and then it feels like you're the Black person. This has been my experience in the room, and everyone else is white and is like, are you hearing me? Are you seeing me? Do I matter to you? If I don't, then how is my child going to matter to you? It's no secret that there is a school to prison pipeline when it comes to Black children, in particular Black boys. So I'm sorry, but my concerns as a mother of a Black son are going to be different from a different angle, with a different lens and a different viewpoint. And of course, race then becomes an issue, and not everyone is comfortable to, allow, facilitate, enable, contribute, support that kind of conversation. I think people are very, especially in this country, they're very careful to make sure that their bias is not as overt. It's very undercover. But I know when someone's treating me differently because of my race. I know when someone's talking to me differently because of my gender, and I don't need them to spell it out. One of the few places where I find solace is within SEND specific communities. An online parents forum conducted through Facebook and WhatsApp was a place I ran to when Sam started smearing. No one tells our stories. No one wants to hear our stories. They're not ready to hear our stories. Our voices are so invisible in this space, and that bothers me so much, because how can we change things if we don't know? And I want people to genuinely want to know.
Okay, then there's the practical burden, which is to do with just the everyday pressures and requirements of making sure that your child's needs are being met. Okay, and I think most mums will recognise that the gender division of labour is such that that much of that responsibility tends to default to mums. That we are still, generally speaking, the primary caregivers in our households. That's not specific to Black mums, but it's certainly something that I think a lot of people will recognise in their own experience. There are some practicalities that are specific to Black mothers. This is a particularly distressing one, but my daughter has very intense meltdowns. She often has them in public, and I've had multiple occasions where because she's very light skinned compared to me, people will make assumptions about that I'm harming her. She's not my child, and all sorts of things. We've had the police called on us on more than one occasion. People have come to perform welfare checks because they've seen my child be enormously distressed in public. And there's this extra layer if you're someone who as a Black woman has tried very, very hard studiously to avoid any engagement with law enforcement, to have them turn up on your doorstep and realize that you're now on their radar even though you haven't done anything wrong. It's a really disconcerting and distressing experience. We talked about some of the burdens, the way the practical burden manifests in terms of career, impact on career. There are only so many hours in the day. I don't think Mel will mind me saying that even in the half an hour before we did this presentation, we were both frantically messaging one another back and forth because this has disrupted our kids' respective routines. And so they are both on the ceiling. And we're having to do this knowing that actually we're not quite sure what we're going to be dealing with after the fact. There's going to be a lot of restorative co-regulation strategies that have to go into us buying ourselves the time to do this. That impacts career. I'm working part-time on that basis. Mel, again, I don't think will mind me saying that she's had to make some adjustments to her working hours as well. That links generally with the practicalities of being a carer, which again are not specific. Those are not specific to Black women, but when you bear in mind everything else we've said about the additional layers in terms of the physical burdens and the psychological burdens, and knowing excuse me, about the lack of empathy you might expect in the face of dealing with those practicalities, there is this additional intersectional dimension. The financial implications of caregiving, both in terms of the impact on career and the fact that meeting your child's additional needs in and of itself can just be very, very expensive. We term it in the book as an autism tax that you pay on trying to make sure that your kids' needs are met, and that can be very expensive. Often appeals and tribunals, the first time you try and secure resource for your child, you don't get it. So you have to have a secondary referral, or you have to write a complaint letter, or you have to appeal, or you have to go to tribunal. It's incredibly time consuming and stressful. And in many cases that we found in our research, this resulted in mums ultimately deciding that homeschooling was the only option they had because they couldn't be confident that these practical needs that their children have were being met in the educational environment they were in. They couldn't get them into another one because of a lack of resource, and so they ended up homeschooling, which then takes all the responsibilities of education and brings them into the private sphere as well, brings them into the home and makes them into something else where you're privatizing your own trauma and your own struggles. So some quotes to that effect, I think, is definitely the fighting with professionals, trying to advocate for your child, get your child what they need, constantly checking people are still doing what they're supposed to do. It's a lot mentally, it's a lot of admin. I'm currently not wage working because the care needs of my younger two children prohibit that for a number of years, actually. You can't wage work because it's a full-time job just to administer your child's life. Nobody really understands that. They don't have to make sure everything's in place every single day and everything's perfect. A large amount of mothers of neurodivergent children are neurodivergent themselves, and you've got to do really difficult things. Even just sitting down doing the DLA form is just so draining and upsetting, because you're only focusing on all the negatives. You're only focusing on the things that your children, that they have challenges with or struggles with. So it's not even a balanced reflection of your child. You don't get to do on the DLA form what Mel and I did at the beginning of the session and tell you how wonderful our kids are before we start talking about these challenges. We get told to describe our kids on their worst day. And that, you know, that's not a pleasant thing to have to do. I'm mindful of time, but we are getting there. So, Jo, if you wouldn't mind us going on to about 5 past, is that okay?
Yeah,
Brilliant,
absolutely. I was just going to say it's 5 to 8 now.
Yeah, no worries. So the final burden is the temporal burden. So this is the combination of enduring parental responsibility. So a lot of the things that we've mentioned are things that affect a lot of parents when their kids are young, but there's, generally speaking, as children get older, they develop more capacity for independence. Now, if your child has a very complex autism presentation, that's not priced in. The chances are that those parental responsibilities will endure into your child's adulthood. And then there are concerns, fears, I would go so far as to say, as to how those needs can be met when you're no longer around. And that was a recurring theme that came out of both our conversations with one another and then our study. There's also time poverty, going back to that practical burden. So many things, so many appointments, so many things you have to remember, so many places you have to be, so many people you have to engage with. There are only so many hours in the day. And that's why it's then hard to carve out space for self-care and to put your own oxygen mask on first, something that we get advised that we should be doing all the time. That's not possible when you don't have the time to do it. And then the significance of timing. So again, the traditional or the expected trajectory of a child growing older and maturing into adulthood has these kind of milestones along the way. Those milestones look very different to us. That sometimes actually makes them more powerful and more wonderful. So if your child achieves something that it was looking as if they weren't necessarily going to manage, it doesn't matter that they've achieved it years later than maybe some of their peers have. They've achieved it. They've reached that point. They've been able to achieve that milestone in their own right, and that's going to be that's a wonderful thing. But it also makes you think differently about time. It also means that the metrics for progress and development are very different from the perspective of a carer than they might be from someone whose child is neurotypical. And all those things come together to form the temporal burden, which our participants expressed as follows. You really think about everything for the future in a lot of detail, maybe a bit excessively so. You know, will they get married? What will their education be like? How's their day-to-day work going to be? Will they speak? How will the world treat them? What will I do when someone's bullying? You know, all those things. Now that he's 21, I have that real fear, and I think many of us do, especially when you're raising young Black boys and young Black men, because we know what it's like out there. You know, he's a 6'6" Black man walking the street. If I'm not with him, I'm petrified, because I'm thinking whoever's with him needs to be clued up. They need to know what they're doing. If heaven forbid he has an outburst, he gets upset. I don't want to have that fear for the rest of my life, because it robs me of the joy that he has. You have to remember that once you become an adult with special needs, the services and provisions stop. The thought of me not being there when she's going through all the things that she's going through, not picking up the phone, you think, I don't know what she's going to do. You have to navigate the world carefully, and she finds it very difficult to navigate the world as a Black woman. I do still then think, okay, well, what happens after I go? You know, who's gonna be there then for him? Who's going to support him? Who's going to make sure that he's well looked after, that he's loved, and all of those things? This feeds into what we described earlier on, the privatization of trauma. Now, picture all these incredible women who shared their stories with us, and they're carrying around these experiences of the physical burden, the psychological burden, the cultural burden, the practical burden, the temporal burden. And who are they able to share this with? Who can they turn to share how difficult that is? Well, generally, a lot of the time, there isn't anyone. So they're putting on a brave face. Everything that's happening is happening behind closed doors. There's a lot of internalization. They're not seeking help because they don't know where to go for help. And when they do seek it, they often find that it's met with hostility. So instead, we find ourselves saying things like, he's just going through a tough time, or it's hard, but we're coping, we're managing. And that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's actually happening behind closed doors. So this is a quote that actually has come from one of my collective autoethnographic vignettes, when I've talked about one of the few occasions that I did reach out to try and get some help, try and get a social worker for the family, try and get respite, try and open up about just how much of a struggle it was. And I ended up with a MARF, which is a harm statement, being written up for my family. The suggestion that my child was at risk because I'd been honest enough to say she's hurting herself. And the only form they had to fill in doesn't differentiate between whether that harm is caused by the parent or by the child. So a harm statement went in against my family, the most traumatic, appalling experience of my life. I complained and it's been expunged, but I still had to go through that. More than anything, my ingrained suspicion that opening up about the extent of my family's struggles would only increase our vulnerability has been borne out entirely. I now feel even less inclined to engage such services in times of crisis, choosing instead to internalise my trauma, since in the absence of culturally competent provision, this genuinely feels like the lesser of two evils. And from our participants, the system doesn't work together well. So I end up at so many meetings on top of everything else I'm going through. And the meetings oftentimes become ineffective. The right people aren't there, or they weren't aware of that information. So now they need to go away and investigate it more. It becomes really frustrating and overwhelming to keep on top of it and to keep being that open, hopeful mother who wants to keep working with everyone to make sure my son's got the right support. And, you know, I kind of get sometimes in the mindset to be like, expletive, everyone, I'm going to find my own way. Our children are unfortunately in the hands of institutions which we know well to deeply distrust. Still trying to get him the support he needs, still trying to get me some support, you know, even speaking to a social worker and for her to look at me and say, so you're going to have to find your own support because resources are lacking at the moment. Lack of staff and resources are impacting on their ability to support SEND children and meet their individual needs. Therefore, a lot of pressure is put on the parent. Education and social care services flout legislation and force many of us to spend energy and time pursuing formal processes to enforce this. Medically, given that autism is highly represented in Black communities, parents shouldn't be so frequently dismissed. I've also found that services have tried to make me feel guilty for taking up their time when they're so busy and many other children are waiting to be diagnosed or supported.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, so we're going to focus just on the recommendations that we've made and end with a celebration of our children, because I know that was very, very heavy. So our recommendations, and this is within the economic climate that we're in. We're fully aware of Keir Starmer's recent sort of plans for reduction in disability spending, but our recommendation is not to do that. There is an anti-welfare rhetoric that is causing money to be spent actually fighting diagnosis, more money to be spent fighting diagnosis than there is to be spent actually supporting diagnoses. That is ridiculous, in our opinion. So councils actually have more of a budget for tribunals than they'd have for supporting the needs of children. So we say end that false economy. We also say to reduce barriers to referral and diagnosis. So obviously, a lot of our participants mentioned gatekeepers to a referral, so needing to have support from schools, needing to have support from practitioners they didn't have access to. I've just realised that this is cut off, but this is anti-racist and culturally competent training for practitioners, for professionals. So with a global sort of anti EDI rhetoric that's going on, again, these are sort of feel like pie in the sky kind of recommendations, but this is what is necessary. I know that as a former primary school teacher, I had half a day on understanding SEND children in schools, half a day to be able to understand how to work with children that had additional needs. That was back a while ago, though. We also believe that there needs to be more acknowledgement and investment in parental expertise. Parents know their children. Parents are the only reason that I'm able to gain any understanding of when my child does something different that he hasn't done before. I go to a parent forum about it. Hey, my child's doing this now. Has anyone experienced that? Parents are the first people to come to you. And finally, we implore councils and the government to actually empower these communities, Black mothers separately, the SEND parent community separately, and then that interconnection. They are tired to their very bones, and really a lot of these councils make it harder for them. And I know we've got to go, Jo, so I know you're waiting. We're not going to do that. I do want to end really, really, really importantly. A lot of that was really heavy, really, really heavy information. And we have a section of our book where we have asked mothers to describe what they love about their children, and the outpouring was so lovely. We had the same in our focus groups as well. We love our children, and I get told all the time, Mel, stop this, you need to get some sleep, you need to get this, you need to do that. You can't pour from an empty cup. We are on empty a lot of the time, but our cups are never completely empty, because we have that love for our children, and they are the reason that we advocate in such a way. I love Claire's children, Claire loves my children, we love our children very, very much, and I really want that to come across when we're using things like words like burden. There could be, and it is so heavy, there could be that negativity that you're left with, that this is so hard for us that we're going to give up. We are not. We do this for the love of our children.
And more than that, we do it for the love of the children in our community as well. So one final point is the main recommendation we have is that we really want to see, and this comes off the back of our participants, we can't claim any credit for this was their suggestion. We really want to see the development of a kind of one-stop shop that supports Black mothers of autistic children, empowers us as a community so that we can look out for each other, so we can share resource, we've got each other's backs, we managed to basically expand what Mel and I have built together into a community which is accessible to any number of women who find themselves in the same position as us. And we just want to say a huge, immeasurably massive thank you to the wonderful, wonderful mums who joined us in the study and who gave us this idea and who have inspired us to carry on working toward getting the funding and the endorsement and the push for that one-stop shop of culturally competent resources and a space for othered mothers such as ourselves to feel like they're not alone.
Thank you so much. It was 5 minutes over, or 6.
By our standards, that's not bad.
I think that's really good, Claire. We're going to take this as a win, to be honest.
Just fantastic. Thank you so much for that. There is just the time that we had wasn't anywhere near enough really to kind of go into that detail. I think that's always the way with qualitative research, isn't it? But I think you did a fantastic job of communicating with such great passion and sensitivity, and the care for your participants and the care for your families came across really strongly. So thank you so much. Just going to give people time. We've got a couple of questions already in the Q&A, but again, just to let you know that if you have questions for Claire and Mel, please do put them in the Q&A, and I will put them to them. First one is less of a question, more of a kind of feedback, but I think actually it's really interesting. And this person says, for me, being perceived, in inverted commas, as an autistic Black woman, and the layers of masks I have learned to wear to just exist are profound survival. The process of unmasking as a Black woman is a privilege. Accessing this is a minefield, a lonely and isolated one too, one that is not afforded even within my own communities with people who look like me. My healing journey is one filled with so much grief and the most affirming emancipation. I am a late diagnosed ADHD Black African immigrant woman. Thank you so much, Mel and Claire. This webinar is, I'm getting emotional, is so incredibly valuable. So I just wanted to share that with you, because obviously what you said has profoundly touched people.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing. I'm probably going to cry.
Yeah, I probably will as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, for me, when we started doing this research, you have to, as academics, do a literature review, and there was so little.
There was nothing to review.
A lot of academics are like, oh, well, then that means I can, I've got the gap in the market, and I can, I've got this gap in the literature, and I can fill that. But we were really disappointed. There was so little, and everything that you could find on Black mothers raising autistic children was American. And it's a completely different experience. There's obviously different services they're accessing. A lot of African American mothers are accessing things that they're paying for, because obviously there isn't the NHS there. So it was really important for us to actually, I suppose, fill that gap in the literature, but just because we need it as well, that understanding of, are we going insane? You know, is this how it should be? Is this how it is for everyone? So that, I mean, that comment means a heck of a deal, a lot.
It's incredible. Just thank you so much. I mean, I think what that comment has captured beautifully as well is that sense of being hyper visible and invisible at the same time. So when you have all those different layers, those intersecting layers that impact and define your identity, you feel like you stick out like a sore thumb in some respects. And yet when you actually go looking for some kind of support or some kind of what is my place in the world, how can I be seen, how can I be supported, it's like you don't exist. And that, so just I can't emphasize enough how incredibly moving that beautiful sentiment was, and how grateful we are for sharing that. Thank you so much.
Another comment was on the slides that you mentioned when you broke down the triad of oppression. A comment from someone said, "Now I know why I'm in burnout," from that slide.
Yeah.
Really relatable in that. And and actually, just in relation to that, it isn't a question that's been asked here, but I just wondered, would you be willing to share the slides, or is it still in a...
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, if you would be happy to send them to me, I can then send them out with a copy of a link to the video. And I think that would be, because I think for me personally, I just want to look at that slide for a bit longer so I can start to process it. And I wonder if other people might feel the same. Yeah. A question here is that my daughter's tutor raised it as a safeguarding issue, that where we are is not safe due to racism. And the LA and tribunal have ignored it. They said that race isn't a need. They can understand that my child is vulnerable as autistic and as female, but that race has no impact and is irrelevant. And we had another person, I'm not sure if it's the same person, but another person has also said, how do I challenge the LA on the racism aspect? So that could well be two comments from the same person, but I wondered if you had a thought about that, that idea that, race is dismissed.
We'll have a great many, but I don't want to jump in case Mel's got something she wants to say first.
Go.
There is something so profoundly insidious about this discourse of us living in a post-racial society, or being colorblind, or I don't see color and all that. It's a way to deny lived experience. Now, the reality of the situation is that person who shared their daughter's experience, no one knows better whether your daughter is experiencing racial discrimination than your daughter and you. So to be in a position where someone, where not even just an individual, but a structure, a system, an institution wants to tell you that, oh, well, racism isn't a thing, racism isn't a factor, that that's not a source of vulnerability, that's not a source, that's not an axis of discrimination, that's not something that you're experiencing. Just the level of gaslighting, and that was a word that came up. It gets massively overused, the word gaslighting. It's all over social media all the time. Sometimes it's just that, you had a fight with your boyfriend, he's gaslighting you. It doesn't mean that, okay? I mean real, in your bones gaslighting, when you know what your experience is because you are experiencing it and you are being told that's not really what's happening. It's one of the worst feelings in the world, because it makes you question the very essence of your own perception. And this is one of the reasons that we want to be in a position to bring Black women together. Like, we have a little WhatsApp group where we've kept in touch with the wonderful women in our study, some of whom I think might be in the room with us. I do hope so, because we owe them everything. And being in constant touch with them, we're not researchers anymore. We're contemporaries, and anytime we're able to run something past each other, it's just, this thing has just happened to me and I think it's maybe this, and just having that feedback instantly of like, yes it is, and this is how you do it, and this is how you go through the complaints procedure, and we've got your back. We want to be able to create something along those lines for exactly these kinds of instances, for that head check that you need when the world is telling you that something isn't happening to you and you know that it is.
And I think we speak to that in the book, primarily from our sort of, and we didn't get to talk about this. We didn't want to, I guess, talk about this in too much detail about our sort of situating our research in Black feminist thought, but it is that counter storytelling, the actual, I mean, this is why we were so angry about the lack of literature that's out there, but providing this other story to the sort of dominant one that is out there, that that is, oh, it's, you know, it's not relevant. I mean, that would have made me furious. I mean, it has made me furious anyway, but that counter narrative that we are providing with through the voices of our participants shows you that it is relevant. It is incredibly relevant, and it's not. That's what 9 women. Oh, you know, 11 including us. But that is, we know that not to be the case. We know it to be completely relevant in so many ways. Racial identity, we use the terms like adultification, school to prison pipeline. Claire mentioned the amount of exclusions, the disproportionate amount of exclusions that Black children get, that how we didn't mention actually how much longer it is for Black children to obtain a diagnosis than it is for white children. And all of that is because of racial identity. So saying it is irrelevant is wrong. Is, you know, just flat out wrong.
And also, full disclosure, one of the reasons I know that race is relevant is because one of the strategies that I use to make sure my child gets what she needs is that I create situations where my race can't be identified. I do things over the phone, or as Mel was saying, I deputise my husband who left school at like 16. You know, I'm there with my PhD giving him post-it notes for him to take into meetings because he will be taken more seriously than me because his identity isn't racialized. So yeah, there is absolutely no way that that's not a factor. It just is.
Yeah, absolutely. So much love for your project and for your talk. I will, if you can't see these comments after the talk, I'll send them to you, anonymously. So much love for it. But a shout out for A Second Voice as well. Really fantastic organisation, and people are saying a wonderful with Vanessa's way.
We do mention a few organisations in the book. We wanted to say a big shout out to Black Mothers Matters, which is a Bristol community initiative, just for speaking to us. It's not specifically for autistic, for parents of autistic children, but is just doing some amazing work for Black mothers in Bristol. Same as the Global Child and Maternal Health group, who are not only doing their own research into SEND, the experiences of parents of SEND children from racially minoritized communities, but also looking into, again, this is why race is important, the sort of racial disparities when it comes to sort of the effects of pollution. So there are some amazing organizations that are disproving that person who believes that racial identity has nothing to do with it. But yeah, those are the ones that I can remember.
Global Black Maternal Health and Black Mothers Matter were the two main ones.
They've changed their name to Global.
I was going to ask
Child and Maternal Health. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, they're both amazing.
So, question here: how can Black neurodivergent mothers come together and create a community for themselves?
Well, that is an excellent question. It's part of what we're working toward, like everything else. So much of this comes down to funding. So we are trying our level best to see if we can scale up funding in that way. But I mean, in the absence of that, Mel, you're probably best positioned to talk about this because you're so much better at this sort of thing when it comes to being sort of tech savvy and online and social media stuff.
I mean, I would say that I think this is a real struggle for me, as someone described themselves as ADHD, and that's really a diagnosis that I sort of have. I'm not diagnosed but having 2 children that I believe are autistic, I see myself as somewhere on that spectrum. But I think it's really difficult for sort of that live synchronous kind of community. I think because of the level of caring responsibilities, because also of the sort of neurodivergent profiles a lot of mothers have, I really struggle with WhatsApp groups when they're all going off at the same time. I like to come to them later. So it's really understanding that within a group. I think that we've tried to do a really good job of that within our WhatsApp group, of understanding people's different ways that they're going to join and participate in those sorts of spaces. So I think it's giving options. I think it's also just working with those places such as the mothering organisations that we've mentioned to offer culturally responsive spaces for mothers in different localities, because I think we are at the minute offering online support and sort of on phone support. It would be so nice to be able to see each other and be with each other, and that's really, I mean, Claire and I have only met twice in the time that we've actually worked with each other, so there is difficulty in there, but it's understanding what women need and what Black mothers need, and in what ways that they can access those spaces. We wouldn't want to make any assumptions about how people are showing up to those spaces. So yeah, it's something we're really working on and trying to get funding with for. And we're talking about a lot, because I think, yeah, we are different in those ways, aren't we, Claire?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you do manage to do that, please let us know, and we'll put something in our newsletter so that people who've attended tonight will know about that.
I will say there's one small step here that I'm not going to say it on behalf of Mel because it's not my place, but if there's our contact details are there, and if there's anyone who just wants to chat with us, wants to maybe ultimately get involved with the WhatsApp group, or just on a small scale while we're tinkering away in the background trying to get the bigger projects off the ground. We want to meet you. We want to talk to you. So just hit us up.
It's really generous. Thank you so much. We've probably got time for maybe 2 more questions before I wrap up. So how do you plan to share your research with professionals and agencies in education, health and social care and other sectors? While Black mothers are aware of these issues, many professionals are not. So how will we bridge this gap?
That's an excellent question, and always a question around research when you get to the stage where you're done and you're like, okay, now it's dissemination. We're lucky because we work for the OU and they, been broadly supportive of what we do, and and they've got connections in, with media organizations and stuff, and we intend to absolutely take advantage of that to the best of our ability. Once the book is out, we have something tangible to point to that has those recommendations in, that'll also be helpful. And we want to obviously write other papers and follow-up studies. But Mel hit the nail on the head earlier on, where she said we didn't want this to just be an exercise and we've written a book, job done. That we want to make practical change. We want to, we have a transformative agenda for ourselves and for our community. And that is an excellent question, what that actually looks like, how we get people to sit up and take notice. We are open to any and all suggestions on that score, because dissemination is the hardest part in many ways.
One of the things, I mean, as Claire mentioned, was taking advantage of the Open University, but also the book was initially going to be aimed at universities as well, to be sharing with those who are training to become teachers, training to become social workers, practitioners in health and well-being and social care. And so we're hoping, if, as I mentioned earlier, getting that half a day on SEND, when actually, having this sort of text, this canon of data at the stage where you're training to be A or qualifying to be A, at least it's going to be within that understanding before you are the practitioner, before you are working with parents like the parents that we're talking about. So hopefully get them when they're young, get them when they're started, is the way forward.
Yeah, the final chapter of the book is a recommendations chapter that is broken down for medical professionals, educational professionals, social care professionals. It's our blueprint for how we think people should be taking these issues into account as they are becoming professionals. So
sorry, someone asked I could see in the Q&A, someone asked for the email addresses as well. So
I still can't see the Q&A, funnily enough.
Thank you so much. Well, I wrap up every webinar with the same question to our speakers, and that is, of all of the things that you've talked to us about tonight, if we were to leave with just one key message, what would each of you want that message to be?
I suppose it seems like it's actually the message that someone has left with, is is the intersectionality of our experiences, of our lived experiences. And so it's understanding the sort of simultaneous forces that are at work when we're just existing as mothers. So the amount of things that are going through my mind when I'm at an EHCP meeting and there are other professionals around me is very much related to my gender, to my race. I know that I'm sitting there thinking, was that too aggressive? Was that too much? Having to police and moderate, as one of our the audience members actually mentioned, just having to really think about perform being a mother, and finding that incredibly draining, on top of all the admin, all the showing up for my child, being a good mother. There is that performative nature of making sure you look like the good mother, the dominant role of a mother. So I think it's keeping in mind how much of that performance is being experienced by Black mothers of autistic children, how draining that can be, and giving us grace, I guess, giving Black mothers of autistic children grace and understanding when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I mean, what I would say is an extension of that in many ways. The adage for me is that carers need care. And unfortunately, we live in a society where Black women are constantly sent the message that we're not worthy of that care. We're not worthy of being cared for or cared about. So it's part of the reason that we are so determined to take these findings, that we made a promise to our research participants that we weren't just going to regurgitate their story and just be people who'd written a book, that we wanted to take those stories and create the conditions for improved outcomes for families like our own, for women like ourselves. And so for me, what I'd like people to take away is that if they have anything they want to contribute, any thoughts, any ideas, if they want to share this presentation with someone else, if they want to help us get the word out, if they've got if they happen to have a rich relative who's in poor health, wants to cut us a big fatty check, anything, just don't forget about us. Don't just take these stories and think, oh well, that's a real shame, and then get on with the rest of your life. Actually, really, please try and sit. If you're not someone for whom this is a personal experience, please try and sit in what we've told you and feel what we've tried to make you aware of, and be inspired to try and help us do something to improve this situation for Black mothers and their autistic children.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Somebody has just asked the book reference. If you scroll down the Q&A, you will see that there's lots of links. I posted a post with lots and lots of links on there, and there is a link in there to the publisher's webpage where you can click on the link, and it will ask you for your email address, and it will tell you when the book is available to buy. But I can also put that in the email that we send to you with the recording of this talk tonight, and also a copy of Mel and Claire's slides, so we can do that in a follow-up. But yeah, so much love for your talk tonight, so much love for your research participants and for your findings, and yeah, it's being the ripples are being felt through our audience this evening, and I'm sure they will also be felt through the people who'll be watching it online later. So thank you so much to both of you.
And thank you, Jo, for inviting us. Really,
yeah, thanks for having us.
Really grateful. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Remember, we have no Wellbeing Hub talk in April due to the Easter break, but we are back on the 22nd of May, where we have Georgia Pavlopoulou and the co-authors of the Improving Mental Health for Autistic Children and Young People book launch. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. We'll see you in a couple of months. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.